All right. So let's just get right into it because we don't have a lot of time, and Austin is on his way back to Los Angeles right after this. So I want to dig into this this meaty role. So my first question, and it's always going to be, why did you want to play Elvis Presley? But before I even ask you that, let me just give a little context. I'm sure the audience, if they're fans, knows this already, but not only did you have a legend like Denzel Washington calling Baz Luhrmann up to say, I know you're auditioning other incredible actors, ranging from Miles Teller to Harry Styles, but there's one guy only who should play Elvis Presley, and it's my guy, Austin Butler. Not only do you have Denzel on your side, you also have Priscilla Presley, who says, Austin is Elvis. So that's the context. That's the context, folks. So when you knew this movie was coming up, why did you want to play Elvis?
There was many reasons, but I think first and foremost it was the obsession with taking somebody that we know so well and who's sort of the wallpaper of culture in a way, and either he's idolized by people and they know every detail about his life, or they see him as a Halloween costume or whatever it is, but it's a certain type of fame that I was just obsessed with the humanity inside of him. So that was one quality in it. The other thing was that it seemed impossible. So anything that seems very hard, anything that really scares me, then I go. I always often use that as a compass, and it seemed just like if it didn't go well, it would. I wouldn't have a career anymore. That sort of feeling, you know. And so there was that, and it was knowing that I would have to find things inside of myself that I'd have to pull out, that I knew I would be a different person when I finished.
So you're saying that the fact that you are playing one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet with one of the most recognizable music catalogs of all time, also following a number of really great actors who've played Elvis before, including Kurt Russell, who actually met Elvis and was in a film with Elvis Presley, that didn't throw you off, that didn't scare you?
Oh, it terrified. Oh my God. It was, the only thing that is nearly as terrifying is doing SNL this week. I mean,
which you were amazing in, by the way.
No, it was such a mammoth terror that I had to start to redefine that energy that I felt, which just didn't allow me to sleep for 2 years, and just transferred into just going, you know, I don't need coffee in the morning because my heart is pounding at 3 a.m. and just get to work, you know.
And let's talk about the fact that Elvis, I mean, you make a great point about this incredible artist and this legendary figure, but you know, there are people who have various Elvises in their mind. There's 50s Elvis, there's 60s movie Elvis, and there's 70s Elvis. There's even, like, if you're a fan like me, there's like micro periods that you like 68 to 71 Elvis, right? There's like people like that, right? That's the vibe that you're encountering, and you have to play Elvis at all these different stages. When you were looking for the humanity in this individual, how did you think about it when you were on 1 week of shooting, you were playing the young 50s Elvis, and the next week of shooting, you're playing Elvis at the 68 comeback special?
Oh yeah, that was a really tricky thing, because initially when I met Baz, he said, I think we can film this chronologically. And so then at that point I thought, well, okay, then I can take a break midway through, gain weight, we'll do, and you know, quickly that idea went out the window, and we realized that was going to be too challenging, and especially with COVID and schedules and everything. So during that period of 6 months when the film shut down, and we were prepping, I was already in Australia for about 6 months, I think, by that point, and then I decided not to come back to the States, and because I just knew I'd lose the momentum. So I stayed in Australia when the film shut down, and so I had 6 months to just obsess and just allow myself to focus on all the things that that I felt like my curiosity needed to go into. And so I made a timeline around my entire apartment, and then I would take bits of the books and I'd put them up, or images and quotes that I would see from a certain time period, or ideas of where he was spiritually or emotionally, or what were his biggest fears at that point in his life. And so I kind of had this entire collage around that was his life, and then so whatever week that I was going into, I could kind of, and then I also had these files on my computer, and just terabytes of Elvis's voice in different periods, and then I would just break it down and go, okay, we're going to be in 56 today, or we're going to be in 72 tomorrow, and kind of work like that. And then whenever I was in the makeup chair, then I would have all my key things that I would look at and listen to, and that would tap me into that period, and that's sort of how I approached it. And thankfully, I had a year and a half before we started. So by that point, I'd spent certain chunks of time just on 56, and I would spend a month on that, and then I'd spend a month on this other period, and it's just like spinning plates, you know. You kind of end up with 1,000 spinning plates, and you're kind of just trying to keep the moves of the 50s in yourself, and then keep the Vegas in 70, and but yeah, it's just kind of balancing it all.
Well, to that point, Austin, I can say that in watching you in whatever phase of Elvis's life that you were portraying, you bloody nailed it, man. And I say this, let me say this as a fan, like, of yours, but there have been, we talked about the other actors who've played Elvis Presley, and they've all been great, but there's always been a moment where you sort of see them and you go, well, I can tell if that's Kurt Russell playing Elvis Presley, right? And it's not a I love Kurt Russell, I think he's great, but with you, and I was, you know, when the movie was announced, I'm like, let me see what this guy's gonna bring to the table, because I've seen all these Elvis films. Don Johnson, the Miami Vice Don Johnson played Elvis Presley, you know, back in the early 80s. And so I'm like, let me see what this guy's gonna bring to the role. And I have to say, and I said this to Baz, I mean, you absolutely nailed it. Because there's a way, Elvis moves, and you will know this better than me, Elvis moves in a very, very specific way. And when you've watched his films and you've watched his concert films, someone once described it to me as, he looks like he's, you know when you're walking in a pool and you're walking underwater and your movement's slightly retarded by the water, but that's what he looks like walking on land. And you were doing that, man. The scene where you were on the Milton Berle show, which I've seen that concert over and over and over many, many times, every move, every look at the camera, every lick of the lip, you had it. How did you do that?
Jeez. Oh man,
am I right? I mean, we're the Elvis fans here.
I started working on the Milton Berle performance before I even met Baz for the first time.
What?
Because I watched everything that I could, and then you find certain key things, and I just had a feeling that there's keys into his movements in the 50s in that Milton Berle performance, because he doesn't have the guitar on, and the playfulness of it. And I actually found videos of myself from before I even met Baz of trying to figure it out. It was so tricky, because if you just work it like choreography, it looks like it looks like you're just recreating something. But to make it feel like it's happening for the very first time, it was so tricky. So it was breaking it down by like milliseconds and finding, what his fingers are doing, and what does that feel like? What instrument is it that you feel in that moment? What does that look to the side? When he looks to the side, and so is he looking at somebody who's off stage? Is he trying, and so then I started to create these stories, so that way I would have the intention for every little detail. And there were certain things where it was just physically like getting up on your toes. I mean, I just couldn't do that in the beginning. So I had to train physically to be able to do that. Thankfully, I ended up getting to work with this incredible movement coach, Polly Bennett, who I had found because she worked with Rami on Bohemian Rhapsody. and so she and I would just work every day, and we'd send each other. On Milton Berle, he does this one thing where he puts his fingers like this and he flicks his finger.
Yeah.
It took me about 1,000 times watching that video before I saw that finger thing, and it's such a mischievous little thing to do, and so like innocent yet sexual at the same time. And so there's little things like that took me a long time to see, but I would just watch it over and over and break down every second. Sometimes I'd cover up and only watch his face or only watch his eyes and then only watch his feet, and it was just obsession, really. And then I did that for just every performance, and then I do the same thing for the home footage, and you just try to take as much of that as you can, and then it's got to get to a point where it sinks into your marrow, so that way you're not having to think about it. Because when we went to do Milton Berle, we shot that in one afternoon or something. I thought we'd spend a week on it and I'd be able to perfect everything, but by the time we got there, Baz, he works in such an improvisational way that it was just flowing, and so I couldn't overthink it on the day.
Wow, you shot that in one day?
Yeah.
Incredible. And you've been nominated for a Golden Globe, right?
It's real life.
Which I was just saying to somebody backstage that I don't know if the audience knows this, but Elvis was also nominated for a Golden Globe in 1972 for Elvis on Tour. So I think it's just sort of kind of ironic that you've also been nominated for a Golden Globe. And I clearly you deserve to be nominated for an Academy Award. And right. So I'm definitely feeling that. I want to talk to you about another Academy Award winner, Tom Hanks, who we all know the relationship that Elvis had with Colonel Parker, but talk to me about the relationship that you and Tom developed on set, because it was clear on the screen that you had your own sort of relationship as Elvis and Colonel Tom in this movie.
Yeah, he was such a joy. I was nervous before first meeting, because any one of those times you meet one of your heroes, you never know what it's going to be like. And he surpassed any dream that I had of him. He from the first time he met me, he just gave me this huge bear hug, and then he opened up about his fears, and then I could say, okay, you're scared. I mean, I'm terrified. And then suddenly we were colleagues, and we were able to, play, and we rehearsed, and he brought me a typewriter. And
he does that, right? I think that's his thing that he.
Have you ever heard this story?
Yeah, no, I haven't heard the story, but I know that he gives typewriters sometimes.
Yeah, I heard that he did that, but
yeah.
With this one, he gave me this typewriter with a typewritten letter from Colonel Parker that he had written, and he says, "This is a device on which we can now communicate, my boy." And so then I wrote him back a letter as Elvis, and he wrote me back one as Parker, and we started sending. He lived a couple floors above me in this hotel that we were staying in, and committing somebody else's ideas and mind onto paper in that way, especially typing it out, was a way that I'd never rehearsed before, and it's kind of incredible, because you really question every sentence and you go, does Elvis feel this? And so we started sending these things back and forth, and it started to really establish our relationship, because he would kind of choose, if you watched Blue Hawaii that night, he'd say, my boy, I've seen your new film, Blue Hawaii, and he'd kind of say something about that time period, so then I'd write him something back, and you're just kind of fleshing out the whole life of these two men. So that's one thing about him, but when we got to set, because of COVID and because of the prosthetics that he was in and that amount of time that I was in the chair, we had two separate rooms. So, and we'd get there at 4 a.m. or something to start getting the hair and makeup, and I would only ever see him as Parker, and he would see me as Elvis. So by the time that we walked on set, I wasn't seeing Tom Hanks. We were walking on stage as these two guys, and yeah, so that was our experience for the most part, and he was so lovely, and it was so helpful for me, because he had so much belief in the fact that he was doing something good for me with every decision that he made. So it gave this obstacle for me that he's not this clear villain in the eyes of Elvis. Otherwise Elvis wouldn't have been with him that whole time. Right. There had to have been some sort of fatherly connection and this love, and especially like the moment in the closet that leads to these like trauma and kind of holding on to a certain person as your comfort, and also feeling like you owe somebody, and so it made the relationship very complex. And he's just fantastic to work with.
That scene, the scene that I think for me was probably one of the most powerful scenes in the film is in the wake of Elvis losing his mother Gladys, and Colonel comes to comfort Elvis, and of course, as fans, we have those images of Elvis and his father Vernon sitting on the steps of Graceland, mourning, which you replicated and Baz replicated perfectly. But I wanted to hear from you, knowing that you lost your mother in 2014. I know that she was. You talked about it on SNL, but you've talked about it before, how she was so instrumental in getting you to this point where you are in your life. What it was like to dig deep for a character, for a person, Elvis, who loved his mother beyond all comprehension, beyond belief, and what it was like for you knowing that you'd lost your mom, and to have Colonel Tom Hanks there with you in that scene. What were you feeling?
Well, I mean, those are the moments where art and life just get very blurred, so just grief, it felt like, those scenes you always kind of look at and you go, okay, we're going to have to film that at one point. And I used to also have a feeling that using a personal loss in a scene cheapened it or something, like took away from that loss. That if you have lost somebody and then, that you're sort of manipulating your own self for art, for this personal thing. But now I don't see it that way so much. I see it like honoring that person, And so once I allowed myself to do that, then I was able to go, this is exact. It's not, I'm not having to fake for something right now, because I know exactly what that feels like, and it's all there. I just have these shock absorbers that try to keep me away from that feeling as I go through life. And we all have that. Whatever pain that you go through, you have that thing that kind of absorbs the pain, so that way you can joke about something. Or so on days like that, you just kind of, I just woke up and knew, you gotta kind of pull all that away and just allow the wound to just kind of surface,
And so the other thing that I think is which I welcomed as a fan, which and is very evident in this film, is for the first time we see the real forces of music, of culture, of art that sort of made Elvis who he was. And we had never really seen it depicted on the big screen before. People had read about it and people understood, and Elvis himself talked about it many times in interviews, but just talk to me about these themes that were explored in the film, the understanding that Elvis's music and who he was as a performer came from, rhythm and blues, black music, country and western and gospel, and how he took all those and replicated into something that was uniquely his own, as personified by you in this film.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful thing that I'm so glad that we got to finally, show to the world in some way, that he was this prism that so much went in, and then something came out that was unique to him. But getting to see all those influences, and for me it was going down to Nashville, and before we ever went to Australia, we went to Nashville and Memphis and spent a lot of time there and recorded music in RCA. But one of the most special things for me was going to this. We record all the gospel numbers, and so getting to be in this tiny little church that was built in the 1800s, and with 30 of these incredible gospel singers, and so all the voices that you hear in that, I was in the room while that gospel number was being recorded, and they just sang for like 8 hours, and it taught me so much about movement and soul and music, and that feeling where you can't help but stomp your feet to music, and it starts to make you, chills down your spine, and your soul is igniting, and so for me, like getting to have those experiences and the fact that we don't have Elvis without black music, we don't have Elvis without black culture. His style, the way that he sang, all those scenes down on Beale Street, like that's being in Club Handy, like those stories were true, about that. So, so for me, it was getting into those experiences myself that I just feel so fortunate that I got to experience that, because I experienced music in a way that I never had before, and movement in a way that I never had before.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Let me ask about another experience, and this is the fanboy in me asking. So I mentioned that Priscilla Presley herself said that when she saw you as in the film, and tears because she was seeing Elvis. What was it like meeting Priscilla and Lisa Marie and Riley and I mean, what was that like? I don't know that I know.
It's hard to put it into words.
Yeah, I was gonna say, man, I don't know.
It's I met Priscilla before we started filming. I met her during that trip in Memphis. It was my first time ever at Graceland, and I met her then. And she was so ethereal, and we didn't talk much, but it was just being around her presence and just looking her in the eyes. And then we went off and we shot the film. And during that time, I kept having this feeling of the responsibility to her and to Lisa Marie and to Riley and the entire family. But you have no idea how they're gonna feel about the film. And Lisa Marie especially, because I didn't talk to her beforehand. And so that, it's so hard to put into words how much that actually means to me. Because, I've said before, but there's never been a person I haven't met that I've loved more than Elvis, because I spent so much time with him. And then we were at Graceland, and we had just done this, we were getting ready to do a screening there. And I was walking down this hallway, and I look at the end of the hall, and I see Lisa Marie for the very first time. And she'd seen the film now. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and we both just got tears in our eyes.
Really?
She hugged me like I was her family. And that just meant so much to me. And then she just took me around Graceland by herself. And like I got to see all these places that most people never do, and getting to hear it straight from her about what it was like, growing up with Dad in the house, and it's wild to feel so much love for somebody through their own father. Like I had felt all these feelings of how much, like that scene in the car having to say goodbye after the divorce, and
powerful.
All of those things, they were in my nervous system, and then she's experiencing something on the flip side of that. For me, it was an experience like I've never had before. And she's the entire family has been so lovely, and this means the world to me, truly.
That's incredible. And the fact that you were able to not only meet the members of Elvis's family, but also to be in Graceland, and to even the costumes that you wore, especially from the '68 comeback to the end, that were designed by people who had a hand in designing Elvis's stage costumes. I mean, I know, because you live with this character even before you started filming, and then all of a sudden you're dressing like him, you're talking like him, and you're behaving like him. Is there a moment where, and I know that's been written about that, I don't know what your voice it sounded like when you were a younger man, but but it sounds good to me.
I mean, right now it's almost gone. Screaming like a.
but you also you sent, if I read this, that you performed Unchained Melody, and you sent that in to Baz, and you performed it. I'm guessing you performed as Elvis in his later years, performing that, singing in that way.
Yeah, I mean that one. My voice was I was singing it as the version that we eventually see in the film. Yeah. But I wasn't trying to make myself look like him or anything. That was the first key that I really learned into how I would approach it, because it came from grief. It was this nightmare that I'd had, and so it was this pain that led to me going, what happens when you take real emotion and you put it into music? like you need to sing those words, and once I did that, then I realized, oh, all those other things that you can kind of put on externally, they're all for nothing if it's not coming from your soul. So that taught me a lot. That very first tape that I sent to Baz.
That's incredible. All right, we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience. There will be people that will have microphones that you will ask your question to. It's going to be very arbitrary. I'm just going to, you're going to raise your hand. I'm, going to just sort of randomly pick somebody, and then you just tell us who you are, where you're from, and what your question is. All right, let's start. Yes, sir, right there with the Christmas sweater. Well, I want to make sure everybody can hear you, but if you think you can.
Thank you. Austin, congratulations. This is a kick-ass performance, and more than that, you inhabit this character. As a fanboy, I just have to say, and this is my second time seeing it in full from beginning to end, and I'm scared about the third time. I don't know if I'll get through it. It's very moving, so thank you. The question,
you so much.
You're welcome. The question, I'm glad you brought up Priscilla a couple times now. I think the scene at the end at the bottom of the stairs, the scene in the car, you talked about your source for so much. Did Priscilla inform those moments? What was your performance in those scenes? I think is great, and I think those scenes are fantastic. Was that a screen? Was that the screenplay? Was that something from Priscilla? How were those scenes put together, and what informed your performance in those points?
It's a combination of things, but some of it was from conversations that I had with Priscilla about how Elvis handled certain emotions when nobody else was watching. It was, even after I talked to her, I still would read and reread her book and underline things and find little things about the way that he handled something that would sort of inform those scenes like that. Some of that is just, the way that Baz wrote it. And so it's a combination of a lot of things. My own personal experiences with my relationships to people and that sort of thing informed that as well. And it's a combination of a lot of things, I'd say. But thank you.
Yes, ma'am, right there.
Hi. I went to Memphis for the first time in March, and then I saw the movie not long after, so I've seen it more than once. And I'm a writer, so I like research, and so I wanted to read more about Elvis, and I started reading, and I kept reading, and I kept reading, and I'm still reading now, because the story of Elvis is so rich, so complex, so amazing, that you just can't put everything on the screen. It's just an unbelievable story. So how did you deal with that? Because I'm sure you're aware of all these elements. It's like one of the great tragedies. It's an unbelievable story. So how did you deal with that? Just with all this information, and are you still continuing to read and hear new stories about Elvis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, you sound like me in that respect, because I read every book that I could possibly find, and it's also there's so much that was written on Elvis's life, and there's certain details that people will oppose each other in the way that they talk about a certain story, and then you talk to some of his friends and they'll say, oh no, that person wrote this, but this is the way that it really happened. And so it's that thing that you kind of have to, you feel like a detective trying to solve some mystery, so that was, and it's also hard because I'd read something and I go, oh my God, that's such that moment needs to be in the film. And then I would keep sending Baz these moments that I'd say, oh, that's got to be in the movie, that's got to be in the movie. And then you realize this would be like a 30-hour movie or something like that. So that's where I had to just trust Baz that he would weave together the narrative in such a way. And yeah, but it's I still it's been a while since I've read an Elvis book because I've been obsessing about some other things lately. But
Dune.
Yeah, Dune. And, yeah, biker gangs.
Yeah,
and
biker gang.
But I definitely will read more. Whenever a new book comes out or something, I know that I'll have to read that. I've read all the ones that are out there now, but yeah, I always love when new tracks come out as well, because they'll release remastered versions and different things as well.
I would love to see, and I told this to Baz too, that because we're talking about the fact that Elvis's life, I mean, even in a movie like this, you're not able to cover every single thing. And I said to Baz, maybe you should do Elvis in Hollywood, like those 10-year, and bring Austin back to play like Elvis
so
from like
many good
57
stories from the
to
Hollywood
67,
theater.
Man, I mean, it would be pretty cool because that's a part of his career that is most, in my eyes, the least explored. Because there's this narrative. Elvis wasn't a great actor. Elvis did a lot of crappy movies in the 60s, but not if you're a fan and not if you were in Hollywood at the time where every single Elvis movie outperformed and outgrossed anything else that was coming out, from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf to West Side Story, and there's a lot to mine there. I'm just saying, Austin. I mean, just saying. Yes, sir, I saw you earlier, yes. Oops, sorry.
That was a dramatic.
Oh, yeah.
We can leave it there.
First of all, thank you for being here. And what was your best moment while working on the production, and what was your most challenging moment while working on the production?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. Some of the best moments were some of the most challenging moments. The rehearsal for the Vegas show. That's a story that some people may have heard, but the way that happened was we had a track that we were meant to be doing that to. And I had this track for about 8 months of making That's Alright Mama and going through the first bit of the song. And so the way they were supposed to work was I had a click track, and I'd spend 4 bars with the piano player and then 4 bars with the guitar player and kind of work my way through the group. And we did, but all that, musicians, their instruments are muted. And so the way that we eventually did it was that we filmed it once and they were all muted and it was the click track, and something is wrong. Something is off, and we have to do something about it. And so he came up and he said, you think you could do it live? And he said, they're all real musicians. If we just unmute their instruments, and you then have to get them to play the song the way that you hear it. And so what he did was he told all the musicians to purposely play it wrong because they never played the song before. And then it was my job to then get them to play it right. But I had this idea of the perfect way to do it in my mind, the 4 bars with that piano player, 4 bars with the guitar player. So we shot it. I spent 4 bars with the piano player. He didn't get it right. I moved on. He didn't get it right. I moved on. And suddenly it's a cacophony. And all the air is sucked out of the room. It feels awful. I felt like that was one of the moments. That's the one moment where I almost had a panic attack. I felt this like I'm going to fail everybody right now. And then after that take, I felt that feeling. Hair and makeup comes up, and they're touching costume and sewing things, and it's all these people, and that was the moment where I thought, oh, my world feels like it's caving in right now. And then I said, you know what, guys, can I just take 10 minutes? And I went into one of the back rooms, and I had this pep talk with myself. So I was looking at myself in the mirror as Elvis, and I'm saying, this isn't about playing it perfectly. This isn't about doing what you think that this needs to be. This is about hearing the music in your head and going out there and getting them to play it. If you guys spend 10 minutes with that piano player, you do it. It's this moment of me just talking to myself like that. And then I walked back out, and I said, all right, Baz, I'm ready. And so they action, and I spent as long as I needed with that piano player, got him to get it, and then we worked our way through, and suddenly it was this beautiful music. And it was like capturing lightning in a bottle, because suddenly I felt what it felt like to hear music in my head that they don't know yet, that they're not playing right, and then getting them to get that. And so the trombone players didn't get it right. I told them to sit back down and do it again, and then they did it, and then they got it, and suddenly it was like my heart was soaring, and things were coming out of my mouth that weren't in the script, but it was just inspired by what the guitar player was doing or by whatever, and so that was one of those moments that turned out to be a beautiful moment for me, and it's also one of those moments that I so badly wanted to somehow be able to show and the genius of Elvis, you know, because he didn't write a song. So I kept asking, I wrote it on my script, where is Elvis's genius? How can we show that? And that was one of those moments where if we had just done it to that perfect click track, I don't feel like we would have felt any of that. But I hope that we captured that, and that was one of those, that was challenging and a great moment for me.
That's great. That was a great scene too. I mean, it's an incredible scene to show Elvis, as you say, Austin, the genius that was Elvis Presley was not just in the way he interpreted music, but in the way that he presented it. And you saw in that scene, and there have been snippets in some of his concert films where you can see him doing just that, but to see it play out the way it did, and then whenever the band is grooving it and you jump in, I was just like, oh man, this is so cool. Yes, ma'am. There's a mic right there.
Hi,
Hey.
my name's Olivia, and I have been a fan since Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure, so this is very surreal. It's very exciting. My question is, obviously, this may feel like overwhelming at times. I can't even imagine that what you've been doing for the past year, 2 years with this movie. And in the movie, Elvis is by the Hollywood sign, and he's talking about, they're like, who are you? And he needs to go back to his roots. Is there ever a moment where, if you ever feel like very overwhelmed, that you feel like there's a part of you that you need to channel in or go back to? And if so, like, how do you find that?
That is a wonderful question, and something that I think about every day. You know, it does get very overwhelming, and it's, everything happens so fast. You know, there's all these things that I got to act out, you know, living through Elvis's eyes, these things, and now I'm sort of learning from the own lessons that I kind of feel like I'm learning. Like I'm able to look at them retrospectively through his entire life, and I mean, some of it, I mean, for me, it's like being around my family, being around nature or an animal or something, you know, just like kind of getting away from any of the noise. But the other thing is acting is very humbling. So I've been lucky that I've been working, so I haven't. You know, there's all kind of there's like this weird thing that's like this collective ego identity of yourself that, you know, it's kind of like, this is Austin Butler, this is Elvis Presley, and it's what everybody kind of thinks of that person. And then you have times where you just feel very lonely or you feel very sad or whatever. So for me, it's being able to work and not be thinking about that stuff, and instead be humbled by, that scene didn't go well, why didn't it go well, and then having to go back to the drawing board and dig deeper and try to get more truthful, and that's been very grounding for me as well. But thank you for that question.
Thank you so much.
We're gonna take one or two more questions before we wrap this up, but it raises an interesting question that I have, Austin, which is, I was surprised. I think that sometimes when you're a fan of Elvis and you know, like you did all this research, and so you know everything there is to know, and you're not surprised after you've done all this research by the stuff that you're filming, because it actually happened. My colleague Tony DeCopel, I don't know if Tony might be here, but we were on set, and after he saw the film, he said, "Man, I didn't know all that stuff." I mean, he goes, I think what he said to me was, did somebody really say, we're not going to put on that I can't even use the word, but N-word music and, you know, smashing records in the 50s, and I said, dude, that really happened. that really happened. And for me, this was not only just a film about Elvis Presley's life, but I think for people who are especially younger here, that it might have reintroduced or introduced people to the music business as it was in the 50s up until the 70s. Do you think about that you've actually also now educated a generation of filmgoers of this era of music that probably they never knew about?
Not specifically like that, I don't think so. So, thank you for...
Yeah, because I mean, right? I don't know if you all feel that way, but that's sort of the way I think about it, which is there are things that happened that people have forgotten or they just never knew because it's just not as common anymore. But you put that in the film. All right, I'm going to take, yes, sir, right there. Yep, yeah, you. And then we'll do one more, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay.
This is probably going to be a really weird question, but
boy, where do we go from here?
I'm a musician and a songwriter and a performer and everything, and when we go out on stage to perform, you get dressed up and you put on your best everything, and you go and you perform for a crowd and they love you and it's great, and then you go home, and that part of your life is non-existent in that moment. I wanted to know, being Elvis and getting dressed up in those costumes and being in front of those audiences and doing that day after day after day, after rapping and it was totally done, did you miss being Elvis?
That's a good question. That's a great question, actually.
That's a really good question, and it's for the duration of filming. I know that in retrospect, it doesn't seem. I won't even go there. It felt like the meaning of my life was to do this as truthfully as possible. So rapping suddenly was the meaning. Well, like what do I do? What do I do with my day? Who am I? I rapped and I went back to the trailer and we didn't have anything else to film, and I went into the trailer and I just started crying, and I was just going, I don't know who I am, I don't know who I am, I don't know who I am. And it was this it's a really strange thing. And it's not like I was, telling people at the coffee shop to call me Elvis. It's like whenever we talk about this idea of method acting or something, it's not that. It's like you're just trying to stay as focused as you possibly can and not have this feeling of you being here and then having to step up into the character and then back down, but just this feeling of moving laterally from this is live to this is the scene to this is live to, and so that's what I was doing. So certain things, like I didn't want to have to think about the voice, I didn't want to be like, suddenly now I feel like I'm doing an Elvis voice thing. So I just was in it, and then it allowed me to go, this is how I order coffee in the morning, or this is, and then I don't feel like I'm suddenly faking it, but yeah, I didn't tell my sister to call me Elvis, right? But when you get done, it is jarring. It's like you have this sort of whiplash that it took a while to kind of come back to earth in a way.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
This young lady here, and then we're going to wrap it up in black.
Hi, Austin, and
Hello.
hi, Vlad.
Hey.
I'm amazed, of course, by your performance. This is my first time seeing the movie, and it was incredible. And my family and I are huge Elvis fans because my grandfather grew up in Memphis, and we've spent a lot of time talking about segregation during that time period, which is mind-blowing to me. But I'm curious how you went about sort of learning about Elvis's really unique role during that time.
It's a detail about the whole Elvis story that you don't have his story without that time period and everything that was happening in the world. So, and my whole thing was just absorbing myself in all of it as much as I could, and so some of that was going down to Tupelo, where Elvis was born, and Baz met this beautiful man who now sadly has passed away, but he brought me down to meet with him, and he's the little boy that goes to the gospel tent with Elvis. And they would go to the juke joints together and stuff, and so he took us around and showed us where their houses were, and he said, you know, Elvis wouldn't have shoes, and he'd come over, and he as a black man had said, you know, Elvis was the one white person that I saw who would call my parents sir and ma'am. And I thought that was such a beautiful, like, window into the soul of Elvis, you know, and because that's, yeah, so, and then when you start, like, reading about Club Handy and hearing that he was most nights the only white face in there, but it was the place that he would go that he felt most at home. It's like, I'm getting chills right now, and so I think he just had so much love, and but it was yeah. I mean, just getting to be down there and learning from people like Sam was some of that for me. But yeah, thank you,
folks. Elvis is now the #2 highest-grossing musical biopic in film history, only behind Bohemian Rhapsody. Right? It's also the highest-grossing domestic non-franchise film of the year. Yeah. And Austin Butler is nominated for a Golden Globe, and we're hoping that he gets nominated for an Academy Award. The film is Elvis.